The city was quiet, wrapped in the stillness of a winter night. Streetlights flickered against the damp pavement, casting long, eerie shadows. It was a night like any other, until a German shepherd came sprinting through the empty streets, his breath visible in the cold air. Rex ran tirelessly, weaving through alleyways, dodging the occasional passing car, his eyes filled with urgency. He had a purpose, a mission. He had to find help. As he neared the police station, he skidded to a stop, his paws scraping against the sidewalk. He barked, once, twice, then continuously, each sound a desperate call. Inside, Officer Jake Reynolds had just finished his shift. He stretched, rolling his shoulders, ready to leave when the sharp barking cut through the quiet. At first, he dismissed it. Stray dogs weren't uncommon. But the urgency in the sound made him pause. With a sigh, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. His gaze met Rex's. The dog's deep amber eyes burned with an unmistakable message. Come. Rex tugged at Jake's pant leg, then turned, sprinting down the road. Something in Jake's gut told him this wasn't just a lost or hungry dog. With a quick decision, he followed. Rex led him through winding alleys, never hesitating. The damp air carried the faint scent of decay, the alley narrow and littered with remnants of forgotten things. Jake's flashlight flickered across the brick wall ahead, then he saw them. A young woman, frail and still, was curled against the cold bricks, her arms cradling two tiny infants wrapped in thin blankets. Their faces were pale, their breaths shallow in the frigid air. Jake's breath caught. He crouched beside her, reaching out carefully. Her lips were dry, cracked. Her skin, ice cold. When he touched her shoulder, she barely stirred. But then, her eyelashes fluttered, her dull eyes met his, filled with a silent plea. Beside him, Rex whined, pressing his warm body against her and the infants, shielding them. Jake suddenly realized Rex had been keeping them alive, his warmth the only thing standing between them and the unforgiving night. Jake wasted no time. He shrugged off his heavy-duty police jacket, wrapping it around them. Pressing the radio on his shoulder, he spoke, his voice sharp with urgency. "This is Officer Reynolds. I need an ambulance now. Woman and 2 infants, critical condition. Alleyway off 7th and Main." The radio crackled. "Copy that. Dispatching now." Jake exhaled, his focus snapping back to the woman. "Help is coming," he assured her. She blinked sluggishly, her lips parting, but no words came. Rex nudged one of the babies gently, his nose pressed against the tiny bundle, as if checking for life. The dog hadn't just found them, he had never left them. And in that moment, Jake knew, Rex had saved them. Sirens cut through the silence, flashing red and blue reflecting off the wet pavement. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of movement, assessing the situation. "The mother's pulse is weak, the babies are hypothermic," one muttered. "We need to move, now." They wrapped the infants in thermal blankets, lifted the woman onto a stretcher. But as they loaded them into the ambulance, Rex lunged forward, his nails scraping against the pavement. A paramedic blocked him. "Sorry, no animals allowed." Rex barked, a sharp, desperate sound that cut through the night. His body trembled, his eyes darting between Jake and the closing ambulance doors. Jake knelt beside him. "Listen, buddy. They're going to be okay." But Rex wouldn't move. He couldn't. Jake made a quick decision. "I'll follow behind the ambulance," he told the paramedics. Then to Rex he promised, "We won't leave them." Rex hesitated, his tail twitching, but then he stepped back, his ears still pinned in worry. As the ambulance sped away, Jake patted Rex's side. "Come on, boy. Let's go make sure they're safe." At the hospital, the emergency room buzzed with movement. Doctors and nurses rushed the woman and her infants into critical care. Jake and Rex arrived moments later. The dog's eyes locked onto the doors they had disappeared behind. He didn't sit. He didn't rest. He waited. A nurse approached Jake, glancing at Rex. "Is he yours?" Jake shook his head. "No, he's theirs." She smiled, kneeling to scratch behind Rex's ears. "He hasn't stopped watching that door since he got here." Jake exhaled. "He's been protecting them for a long time." Hours passed. The late night turned into early morning, but Rex never moved far. Every time a doctor walked out, his ears perked up, his body tense. Finally, the emergency room doors swung open. A doctor stepped out, pulling down his surgical mask. Jake stood immediately. "How are they?" The doctor gave a small, tired smile. "The babies are stable. The mother is weak but responding." Rex whined softly. Jake knelt beside him. "You hear that, buddy? They're okay." Rex let out a breath and, finally, sat down. When Emily woke, she saw him first. Rex stood at the foot of her hospital bed, motionless, eyes locked onto hers. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with a soft whimper, he stepped forward, pressing his nose against her fingers. Her lips quivered. "You found help." Rex exhaled deeply, resting his head on her lap, his body finally at ease. A nurse entered, placing the infants in their bassinets beside her. Emily's eyes welled with tears. "They're okay." The nurse nodded. "They just needed warmth, fluids, and care." Emily looked at Rex, her voice barely above a whisper. "You kept us alive." Jake stepped forward. "Emily, do you have anywhere to go?" A shadow passed over her face. She looked away. "No. It's just us." Jake nodded. He had suspected as much. "I lost everything when I lost my home," she whispered, stroking Rex's fur. "And through it all, he stayed." Jake's chest tightened. He had seen devotion before, but never like this. Then he made a decision. "You don't have to go back out there," he said. "We found a place for you. A shelter, resources to get back on your feet. Somewhere safe." Her lips trembled. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Rex lifted his head, eyes locking onto Jake's. The officer smiled. "Looks like your job isn't done yet, buddy." A few days later, Jake arrived to pick them up. As he entered the hospital room, he saw a sight that made him pause. Rex curled up beside the bassinets, his body still positioned protectively between Emily and the babies. Even in sleep, his ears twitched at the faintest sound. Emily smiled. "It still doesn't feel real." Jake shook his head. "That's because it's home now." When the car pulled up, Rex jumped in first, settling near the babies as if claiming his spot. Jake chuckled. "Yeah, figured you'd do that." As the car drove away, Rex sat tall, his amber eyes watching the world blur past. For the first time, he wasn't searching for danger. For the first time, he was home.